Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for July 14th, 2020. I'd just like to call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order concerning imposition on strict limitations on the number of people that gather in one place. Meetings in the town of Upton are being conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the meetings provided in the order. So for today's agenda, we're going to be reviewing or approving the minutes from June 30th and July 7th. Mike Pinko and Bill Taylor are going to talk about Conservation Partnership Grant. We're going to talk about reappointments to the boards and committees. We're going to do year-end transfers, accept certain grants, donations, and discuss financial reserve policy, and then the standard stuff, recognition, the town manager report, any public comment. And then we have an executive, we're going to break for executive session after public comment. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started with the meeting minutes from June 30th and July 7th. Maureen or Steve, do you have any questions or changes you wanted to make to that?
I did not see the minutes for July 7th. I did see the ones for June 30th. Could everybody else open those okay?
I'm fine with both meetings.
Same, yep, I saw them both.
Okay. Again, I wasn't able to open the 7th. Everything look okay to both of you?
Yes.
Yeah, but we can wait. There's no rush in approving these, Steve. If you want to look at them first, we can just approve the ones for July 30th, and then next time we can go back to July 7th. It's no problem. There's no reason to approve them if you haven't seen them and aren't comfortable with it.
Okay, very good. Why don't we go with that? We'll just approve June 30th then. Okay, I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 30th.
Maureen Dornell, aye.
Stephen Metellian, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action. Thank you. Mike, and I saw Mike. Is Bill here too? Let's see, Bill. So Mike, we'll hand it over to you to talk about the Conservation Partnership Grant if you're ready.
Sure. Thanks, Brett. I'm not sure, is Bill on the line if you are, or Krista Collins from SVT, or Chris Scott? There's several. There's a couple unknown. There's an unknown caller. I was wondering maybe that was Krista might call in. Krista is from Sudbury Valley Trustees. If you looked at the kind of project summary that we sent, that's part of your package. Last year, Bill McCormick approached the Conservation Commission indicating that the Kelly family wants to sell to the town the in-holdings that they hold at Peppercorn Hill. And if you can look at the map that was attached, there's 4 parcels, 3 which are are really kind of centrally located in in the Peppercorn Hill conservation area. Those properties have trails on them that have been used by the public for many years. One of the parcels, the one furthest to the right, has the overlook. It's not quite the top of the hill, but it's the overlook where people can look out over to the west, and you can see Worcester and Mount Wachusett. It's F on the map. So anyway, the commission started to try to work up a plan. The first thing we did was hire an appraiser. An appraisal was done about a year ago in July, and the appraised value of the property was $260,000 for about 66 acres. It's all considered undevelopable backland, so it's roughly $4,000 an acre, roughly. So then we started strategizing on how, the town could acquire this. And, the town does have CPAs, and we could go to the CPA for all 4 parcels. But we talked with Krista Collins from SVT and also brought in Metacomet Land Trust. And I guess I probably, most of you probably know I'm a board member on Metacomet Land Trust. So I think I'm more representing the trust here than I am the town. I am careful to abstain from any votes that involve Metacomet, that the Conservation Commission takes that involves Metacomet. Chris is on the Metacomet board as well. So we have 2 of the 15 Metacomet board members are from Upton. But anyway, not to belabor this too much, but Krista Collins from SVT, and I think everyone felt that applying for another land grant, LAND grant, like the one that we got this past fiscal year for the Robertson property, was going to be a hard sell. If you look at the way that the state, the DCS, the state scores these applications, you're penalized for having a previous successful application within the last 5 years. So we would lose some points there. We would also lose some points because this isn't, none of these parcels are what is called biomap habitat. And also we're not currently an MVP community. Putting all those things together, it seemed like a land grant might be problematic. So the state has a different program where they fund land protection projects called the Conservation Partnership Grant. That one is open to land trusts, not to municipalities, just to land trusts. And Krista Collins suggested that that we think about applying for one of those grants. And she also suggested that Metacomet become involved, because if you look at how those applications are scored, smaller land trusts without staff, which is Metacomet, have some advantages over large, highly staffed land trusts like SVT. So what we decided to do, and this was, kind of a decision between Upton Open Space, the commission. We talked to the CPA, Upton CPA committee, Krista, Metacomet board. All those folks were consulted, and we decided to apply for a conservation partnership grant for one of the parcels, which is parcel 17-28. If you go to the next page of the, so it's that one kind of on the western side of the Kelly parcels. So we've prepared a grant application for a partnership grant application to acquire that parcel. Metacomet would own it. SVT is willing to hold a conservation restriction on it. And the Conservation Commission also voted to hold a conservation restriction on it. If everything goes well, the project budget is around $110,000. SVT feels if we get the partnership grant, they can help us raise the rest of the money. So the thought right now, at least, is that the town wouldn't have to, support acquisition of that parcel. The other 3 parcels would be left to the town to acquire using CPA funds. So I guess first off, are there any questions based on what I've said so far?
I think the only question I had, Mr. Penko, was could you just talk for a second about being a biomap 2 habitat?
Yes.
How would that differentiate this property from, say, the Robertson property?
The Robertson property was biomap 2 habitat. The Robertson property kind of, punched all the buttons. It had biomap, it had water supply, aquifer, it had historical. It really ranked very highly when the state scored it. Peppercorn, unfortunately, doesn't have. Peppercorn has some biomap habitat, but it's not but those pink parcels aren't mapped as biomap habitat. That bog just to the north of the pink parcels is biomap. So, and I think if I remember right, like you get about from 0 to 9 points for having biomap habitat out of 100 points when they rank these applications. So we probably would get 0, in a land grant. It just happens, it doesn't mean this habitat isn't valuable. It just means that when they did these biomap maps back in 2012, the computer algorithm that they used to draw these lines didn't draw anything on peppercorn except that little area. So anyway, that was kind of the thinking that went behind this, why SVT and Metacomet are submitting this application. What I would, if the Board of Selectmen is so inclined, Krista felt that a letter from the Board of Selectmen, just in general supporting this grant application would be helpful. SVT has sent in a letter. That's probably all we need, but another letter from the Board of Selectmen would be nice. And the Commission will be sending a letter too. And I think I sent to Derek kind of a draft of the letter the Commission wrote, and that could serve as a model for something the Board of Selectmen could send in if they wanted to.
Yeah. We have
just trying to get the best chance possible to get this grant. These are competitive grants. Both of these grant programs are competitive. We're doing the best we can to talk up this grant, but no guarantees. The town could end up having to acquire all 4 parcels, if Metacomet doesn't get this grant.
Thank you,
Mike.
I just want to say thank you, Mike, for the presentation. Appreciate all the information and work as always. Certainly I'm comfortable sending a letter of support advocating for our grant application for this. Anytime we can apply for grant money, really just about anything is a positive step in my mind. So I certainly would support that. Maureen or Steve, I don't know, and we'll open it up for their comment in a moment, but Maureen and Steve, other questions or comments before we open it up?
Jim, who would hold the stewardship on this? Sudbury Valley trustees?
Metacomet will own the property and be responsible for the stewardship. There are some trails on the property which would be maintained. SVT and possibly the town would hold the conservation restriction, which would provide permanent protection for the property. I see you're on, Krista. I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've said.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to, sorry, the train's going by. Thank Mike for doing a really amazing job on the grant application. I read through the almost final draft this morning, and it was really, really thorough and really, really well done. So I'm hopeful that it'll get funded. And if it doesn't, because as Mike said, it is a competitive program, SVT will still be committed raising money to help support purchase if the town wanted to go forward with purchasing all 4 parcels. And yeah, in terms of holding the conservation restriction, our role would to annually monitor it to make sure that the terms of the restriction were being upheld.
Great. Thank you. Steve, any other questions? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think just more or less a general statement. Again, this is really, we're talking about parcel 17-28. So I think the important thing for me anyways is to just make sure that in some fashion that the town of Upton is holding that conservation restriction. It's kind of the way it's presented. It almost appears as though Metacomet would own it, and it looks like Sudbury Valley Trust would hold the conservation restriction. So I just think it would be important, for the town of Upton to in some way be a stakeholder there.
Yeah.
I agree, Steve, and the commission has voted, with me and Chris abstaining to be willing to co-hold the conservation restriction with SVT. We already co-hold one other conservation restriction in town with SVT, and that's for Sweet William Farm up on North Street. So there's a precedent in town to co-hold a conservation restriction.
And the vote I got from the SVT board allows us to co-hold it with the town.
Okay. And I guess that's the only thing I was just curious. So it would be the Conservation Commission that would actually hold that that conservation restriction, not the town of Upton. Is that right? Or are they essentially one and the same?
One and the same, essentially.
Okay.
They are one and the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
And may I add one thing? This is Chris.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Okay, the one thing I wanted to add was, regardless of who owns the property, the public is able to use every parcel. So it's not going to affect anyone's usage of the property. Who owns it and who does the maintenance of it?
Good. That's a good clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
One question that comes up sometimes is hunting, and just FYI, Metacomet does allow hunting on its properties, pursuant to state regs. So hunting would, be permitted if this became a Metacomet property.
And people right now do hunt on the land.
They do, yeah. What about on the rest of Peppercorn Hill, Mike or Krista?
In terms of
Hunting? This is Chris. I've seen people hunt on Peppercorn.
Mike, do you know if there's hunting on other parts of Peppercorn Hill?
Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, the Conservation Commission allows hunting on all of its properties. So I would suspect people do hunt. I don't hunt myself, but I imagine people do hunt there.
Okay, great. So it sounds like if there are no other questions, we will entertain a motion to write a letter of support for this conservation partnership grant.
I would move that we write a letter of support for the conservation grant on the Kelly property at Peppercorn Hill. Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Second the motion, Stephen Metellian, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Show that as unanimous action, please. Thank you very much, folks. Really appreciate the partnership and the work and all of the efforts that are made by so many people and all the conversations and the time spent working together and collaborating across many organizations to make these kinds of things happen. It's a great service to the community. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Good evening, folks.
Okay, bye.
So we can go into the annual reappointments to boards and committees. So I think for the sake of this one, if Steve or Maureen, if one of you can sort of take the lead in terms of making all the motions and have the list in front of you, that would be great. I think it would just be a little bit faster than trying to pass it back and forth and
On the appointments,
yep.
I believe it's just the names in gray. So did you want to take the lead, Maureen?
Just so I can clarify, it's the names in purple, seeking reappointment, and then there are a couple new applications for the Fire EMS Advisory Committee that have to be voted on.
I can take the lead on appointments.
Thank you.
I move that we appoint Donna Desjardins to the Economic Development Committee. All purples, right? And I move that we accept the appointment of David O'Brien to the Capital Budget Committee. I also move that we appoint Doug Cook to the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee. I move that we, no, let's see, I think that's it. As far as the purples go.
Yep.
Okay, I'd just like to amend the motion. It looks like one of them is a 3-year appointment, so I would just want to make sure that the other previous names were 1-year appointments. David O'Brien for the Capital Budget Committee is a 3-year appointment.
I agree, and I will move that we amend it to David O'Brien, a 3-year appointment.
Okay, I would second the motion. Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action. Okay, so now I think we need to have, we had several folks that were interested in the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee. Those are, I believe, 2-year terms. Is that right, Sandy?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right, so what are the slots we have and what are the applicants we have?
Go back up. We have 2 applicants for that, Jonathan Moen and Matthew Kerr.
Yep. Okay, so Matthew Kerr and Jonathan, would those both be on? One would be a citizen representative and one would be the on-call firefighter representative. Is that right?
That's correct.
That they're both on call. Okay. Okay. Any discussion? I mean, I read through the applications. We certainly know Doug Cook, and it sounds like the other gentleman's been in town for several years. His wife has actually applied to be on some other boards and committees. So that was
Capital budget.
Capital budget. Yep.
Capital budget.
Yeah. So any discussion, Maureen or Steve, on these folks?
I think that if there's 2 spots available and we have Jonathan Moen and Matt Kerr, it appears as though both of them are on-call firefighters. So I think the only discussion is which slot, and it's really probably a moot point, is which slot, assuming there's no objection to appointing either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of, do we want to appoint Matt Kerr as the on-call firefighter and maybe John Moen as the citizen representative?
Yeah.
So I guess if there's no objection to that, I could make that motion.
Comments on that or questions?
Andy, is the term of the appointment the same? I don't have that screen up right this second. Were they 2-year
Yes, they're
appointments?
both.
Yeah,
Yes,
they're
both 2-year appointments.
2-year, okay.
Okay, Maureen, did you have any questions or comments?
No, this is just the advisory committee, correct?
Fire and EMS Advisory Committee, 2-year terms. One is going to be, we're suggesting Matt Kerr be the paid on-call firefighter representative, and Mr. Cohn be the citizen representative.
I'm fine with that.
Want to make the motion, Steve, please?
Yes, I will. I make a motion that we appoint these 2 particular people to the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee. Matt Kerr is the on-call paid fire representative and John Moen as the citizens representative. And again, that's to the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee.
I'll second that motion. Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Stephen Metellian, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action. Okay. Sandy, are there other appointments we have?
Yes, there would be, we have an applicant for, Kristen Moen has applied for the Capital Budget Committee.
Okay.
And we have 2 BSO Board of Selectmen appointments, so that would fill one of them. And
There we go.
we have 2 openings. One would be for a 2-year term, and the second one would be for a 3-year term. So it would be at your discretion, either 2 or 3-year term.
Okay. Steve or Maureen, any questions on the application?
I have it up in front of me. I guess I was curious, by any chance, has anybody met Kristen Moen, or is she on the line by any chance? I guess I forgot to ask about John Moen as well.
I have not.
Hi, this is Dan Lazarus.
Hi, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so Kristen Moen is the wife of John Moen. They both lived in town, I think, almost 3 years now. John's been active on the fire department. She is somebody who a few of us in Capitol have been trying to recruit, like we did with Justin Pollard. She is a project director for Turner Construction. She will bring a lot of building construction expertise to the Capitol Committee, which kind of fits with the community's immediate priorities in the next 3 to 5 years. So I've met her several times, know her well. She's active on the Fire EMS Association. So she's pretty well accustomed to the community. I think she's going to be an excellent fit for another younger person coming on to the Capital Budget Committee. We're a resident.
Maureen, or are we good?
I'm good.
I'm good.
All right.
Maureen, do you want to decide on the term, 2 or 3 year, and make the motion maybe?
Probably John on the 2 and his wife on the 3.
This is just Mrs. Moen for the one of the terms, either the 2-year or the 3-year.
Kristen Moen.
I would appoint her to the 3-year term. I'd make a motion to appoint Kristen Moen to the 3-year term on the Capital Budget Committee.
Second motion, Stephen Mattelli and I.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. It's unanimous.
Brett, could I ask a question?
Yes.
Brett,
Yes, you can ask your question.
in your last appointment to the Fire EMS Advisory Board, I believe it calls for a citizen. Okay? Now you have appointed 2 call firefighters. So now you have no citizen on that committee, and you have 2 call firefighters. How does one take one hat off and be a citizen and not a firefighter? Only asking.
A great question.
Very good question, Paul.
What are your thoughts, Derek? I'm not sure what the rules of the bylaw are in terms of that citizen. If the citizen requirement is simply requiring that they're a citizen of Upton, or if they are, right, because there's a different, as long as I interpret it as they need to be a citizen of Upton, not that they can't be an on-call firefighter. I think that it just means they need to be a citizen. So that's my interpretation, but I'm not that familiar with the specifics of this bylaw. Derek, do you know?
I was looking up the bylaw when you started to speak, and so I'll read the composition where it simply states, there shall be a fire and EMS department advisory committee consisting of 5 members, 1 full-time firefighter EMT, 1 call member, 1 EMS member, 1 citizen at large, and then the chief, all appointed by or serve at the pleasure of the Board of Selectmen. So it simply says 1 citizen at large. There's no definition of any specific credentials or non-credentials that citizen should have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Chief, do you have a perspective on this or any concerns we can address?
Yeah, I'm talking to you on the phone. My mic on my computer isn't working, but what I would, just my outside view, I believe the intent was a citizen at large. And the only reason I say that is we tried either last year or the year before, Deb Amarelli and myself reviewed kind of how the makeup of that committee was and how the career staff was not participating. And we had found that most of the career staff didn't live in town. So there was a disadvantage of career staff not being able to be on the committee because it said you had to be an Upton resident. So again, I wasn't here when it was created, but I have to believe that the creators of this group tried to make a level playing field for everybody to participate and get just one voice, not two. That's why you have one EMS representative, one call firefighter representative, one career. That's just my outside view of what this group I think was supposed to be.
Got it.
Right.
Derek, what is your, Paul, just a sec. So Derek, what's your perspective on that? I mean, it's obviously open to interpretation, so I'm not sure what the options are at this point.
Well, I would, you look at how the chief outlined the seats on the committee, and if we're looking for a true representation across the community, I think the chief's point was well taken that you have a fire representative, you have a call representative, you have an EMS representative. So therefore, we should probably be looking for someone that has a lens without fire EMS background that represents truly the citizens and what they're looking for with our fire EMS department. As far as service delivery.
Yeah. So Steve and Maureen, I want to get your perspectives as well. I think in our interest in filling these board and committee positions, and the fact that we had fewer applicants than we had slots, we sort of just slotted them in there without reflecting too much on the citizen piece of it. I honestly had just interpreted it as it just needed to be a citizen, so I didn't put any thought at all to the on-call nature of the person that was applying for it. So I don't know if there's a way to revisit that or an interest in revisiting that, Steve or Maureen.
I would, I agree with you, Brett. Has any citizen come forward to be a representative? No. Can we put it out there first, do a search for some citizen to come in and fill out an application? I'd like to see that first before we appoint two people that are on the fire department.
Yep, that would make sense to me. Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're putting a lot of effort into making sure that we're doing this 100% correctly, but unfortunately, this committee has not met. I want to say it's been over 2 years since the committee has actually met. So I don't know if the proper thing to do is leave this as it sits till our next meeting, and as Derek said, and as Maureen said, put this out there and see if we can get someone to step into that citizen's role, or if the right thing to do at this point in time is revoke or rescind that appointment for John Moen until we know for sure, get a little better clarification and cast that net and see if we get anybody that will be willing to serve in that citizen's role. So I think it's at your true pleasure which way you'd like to do that.
Yeah, I support the latter approach of just rescinding the citizen appointment and then soliciting citizen participation, and hopefully we can fill that slot appropriately. And I'm sure that Mr. Moen will understand and hopefully be interested and willing to apply his to here elsewhere in the town's activity.
I would agree with that, Brett.
Okay.
Okay. I would make a motion that we rescind the appointment of Jonathan Moen to the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee. Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action. Okay. Other appointments.
The next two applicants for the Technology Committee, you had two, Dominic Kuhn, who also serves on the Cable Advisory, and David Brooks for the Technology Committee as well.
Mm-hmm. I know David Brooks, and I read the application, so I'm fine with both of these.
And it looks like we have, am I seeing that correct? We have 5 open spots on that committee? Okay.
Yep, that looks right to me.
Okay. Yes, I did read the application. Both gentlemen are well qualified for those seats on those committees.
Okay, I'll take a motion. Maureen, unless you have questions.
No questions for me. I'm just looking for the technology. There we go. Okay, Masha Kasawalski and Stephen Racketon.
Yeah, they're currently.
Yes.
Yep.
They're currently, right?
That's
Yep.
right. And we're
Yes.
looking for Dominic Coombe and David Brooks.
I can make that appointment if you like.
I would make a motion that we appoint Dominic Coombe and David Brooks to the Technology Committee.
The second motion, Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action.
And then we also had an application for David Brooks. He had spoken with Dave Ross joining the RFP committee.
Yeah, and I had heard from Dave Ross that they had spoken, and as the chair that he's supportive of Mr. Brooks's interest. So I will entertain any questions or a motion.
There was some question we had a few weeks ago about revisiting that and meeting with the EDC and the RFP to try to figure out if we needed both of those committees or maybe trying to co-join those committees. I don't know.
That I think is on our list of priorities for the next meeting. Is it, Derek?
Yep, that's scheduled for the August 4th meeting. Yep.
Okay. I just don't know if it's worth making that appointment now until we get a better feel for where those two committees and which direction those committees are headed. I would feel more comfortable just holding off until we sit down with all parties.
I would agree with Steve on that until we find out.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I don't frankly think that much is going to happen with the RFP committee between now and August 4th, regardless. So I think it's a point well taken. So I'm comfortable with that, Steve, if it's and you both are. So why don't we go ahead and move on? Are there other appointments, Sandy, or were those the last two?
Two more, just two more for the Land Stewardship Committee, both one-year appointments. Marcella Stassa, who was a previous member of the committee, and also Alan Rosenfield, who would be a new committee member.
Six.
Okay. Any questions on either of these folks?
No, just a basic, I'd make a comment. I happened to talk to Mr. Rosenfield about this, and he's got a little different perspective on the Land Stewardship Committee. So I think that's going to be a good, different direction. Try to actually make some of the space that we have and some of the trails that we have more accessible. So I like that avenue.
A little bit more about that, Steve. Acceptable in terms of what?
Sorry, I can't hear you, Brett.
Maureen, can you? Yeah, thank you. Accessible. What type of accessibility is he talking about? I'm just curious.
The conversation we had was in respect to Stefan's Farm,
Mm-hmm.
where the parking area is. When you get into the actual trail section, it's so overgrown that you can't actually use the trail.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave an example of another area that he wanted to go and enjoy the outdoors, all of the whatever we have 100 miles of hiking trails in our town, and a lot of them are really overgrown and basically I don't want to say not trespassable, but very difficult to accommodate.
Okay.
And really just the vegetation and overgrowth is most of the problem.
I understand. Okay.
Brett, could we have a conversation with them before we do these appointments?
Yeah, that would be fine with me. Derek, did you have a comment?
Just to Selectman Matalian's point earlier when he had asked Mike Penko about whether or not the town would hold the conservation restriction on the Kelly property. And so I think we need to be clear, and it was mentioned by Krista that those agencies that hold a conservation restriction, they're responsible for the maintenance. So as the town picks up CRs, we will be responsible in some way, shape, or form to have to maintain those trails that Mr. Rosenfield is referencing that are currently inaccessible.
Mm-hmm. Right, so that would cost the town money to make all of those trails accessible, Steve. That's, I think, what the point that Derek is making. So that's a significant investment in opening up trails, but sounds like something you would support. So then that's fine.
I thought that we had set up some sort of a revolving account for land stewardship just for that purpose. So I think they do have a budget to accomplish that task. It's just a matter of, I suppose, prioritizing and trying to stretch those dollars, because I don't think it's a lot of money. And then I think in the past, Brett, I know we've previous meetings we've had the Boy Scouts in, and it's something that we've kind of tried to encourage the Boy Scouts for their Eagle projects to, let's look at some of these properties that we have. We keep acquiring land, but a lot of times it's inaccessible, I think is the best word. So maybe, get that committee to really take that charge and try to, again, using whatever dollars they have available to them, which I don't recall. I want to say it was $5,000 maybe what was in that revolving account. But again, try to use those dollars and try to just make those more accessible for the residents.
Yeah.
Again, yeah. I have no problem appointing both people. I don't think anybody's fighting to get on the committee, but that's at your discretion.
Mm-hmm. Maureen, your thoughts?
I'd still like a conversation with them in order to find out where they're coming from. I'd have to do a little more research on what the rules and regulations are on the stewardships.
Mm-hmm. Good.
If that would be possible.
Yep.
We could hold off till the next meeting, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think there's any sense of urgency to these things. So, given our last experience with fire and EMS, I'd rather not be hasty and be thoughtful in our decision making. So let's learn from our experience.
I agree.
Okay. So we'll punt both of these until the August 4th meeting, Derek and Sandy, and let's ask folks to come and talk with us if they'd like.
Mm-hmm. I guess just for, were you talking about the Land Stewardship Committee, Maureen? You wanted to see what their thoughts were?
Between them and what is required by the land stewardship and the monies that are available for it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it sounds like part of your question, Steve, is around creating accessibility to these trails and opening up these trails, which would be a significant investment. So it sounds like we'd like to understand what that investment would be from the Land Stewardship Committee, and also Mr. Rosenfeld's perspective on how much of an investment he thinks we're going to make in clearing additional trails or creating or opening up trails that we already have in existence. So I think we want to understand that before we make the appointments.
That's correct.
All right, that sounds good to me.
Okay. All right. Any other appointments, Sandy?
That is all
Thank
for
you
this
very
evening.
much. Okay.
Right. Brett,
Yes.
this is Dave Loper. Do you have a second?
Of course. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment with regard to the decision not to appoint Mr. Moen to that fire EMS committee. That totally makes sense, given what I've heard. I think it's important, though, if you could give him a phone call and explain to him the reason why. I wouldn't want him to hear through the grapevine, let's say, if you understand my point. I think that would be an appropriate thing to do if you hadn't thought about that yet.
Thank you, Dave. That's a wonderful suggestion and point, and I will make sure I do that. Derek, can you just help me remember to do that? I'm going to send myself a message now, but I just don't want to forget. Thank you, Dave. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. With that, let's move on to year-end transfers. We've got, looks like about 12 or so transfers to approve. Do we want to walk through these, Derek, line by line? Or how would folks like to go through this, Maureen and Steve? Oh, good. Thank you for pulling it up. I'll make it easier.
This is what I'm saying. I'd kind of like to, if there's any questions on any of the lines, to be able to discuss them.
Great. All right. So let's go through them one at a time. So the first one we have here, transfer 1, is moving $2,900 from the town council expense over to town meeting elections. And that includes the cost to print the ballots and coding the override question removal, as well as postage to mail out the mail ballots. Questions?
The only question I had is it's a little different order than what I'm accessing through the website. But that particular one, I have no question on that. Did you want to approve them all at once, or did you want to do them one at a time?
It sounds, Maureen, like you want to go through each one individually, or do you want to call out particular ones you have questions on, or how do you want to?
I have questions on transfer 4.
Okay. Let's hear it. This is $2,500 from town council expense to treasurer collector salaries with a, says it's a 2-week vacation buyback submitted by the treasurer collector.
And it's more or less a comment on it, because I was not in favor of making a motion to do this transfer 2 weeks ago when we did this meeting. I'm still not in favor of it, but I will vote to do the transfer because it will save the town money. If we go to town council or we go to court, I am convinced that we would win in court, but we would win but lose because we paid $10,000 to $20,000 in legal fees. I just wanted to let the citizens out there know why I'm in favor of it right now, and it is to protect the town's interest. And I think it was well, I can't think of anything else, a sneaky way to do it. To wait till the last payroll of the year and submit a 5-week payout, knowing that there was no money in the budget, no backup to this information, and I don't think it bodes well for the retired treasurer collector. And that's my personal opinion, but I will support the $2,500 in the interest of the town only.
Okay, thank you. Steve, comments or questions?
More or less along those same lines. I was going to ask Maureen what the word you were going to use before you used sneaky, because that took a little while to come up with that one. But yeah, I agree. I mean, in theory, it just seems like, yeah, we don't really owe those 2 weeks, but along the exact same argument, it would cost you a lot more to defend it versus just pay it. But again, where there's no history of these types of payments for vacation time for that particular office. But again, I will support it.
Brett, may I comment on this?
Yes, Mr. Flaherty, go ahead.
This by the selectmen not taking action at their last meeting, you shifted the responsibility for the initial discussion of this to the Finance Committee. Because as you know, it takes an action of both the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen to affect these transfers. So this came to before the Finance Committee last night, and I'll go back to what Maureen just said a little while ago. I spent many hours going over this. Derek and I had discussions more than once with town council. And basically what this came down to was a kind of risk reward type situation. Without getting into too many details, you had probably an exposure if the town should lose we estimated between $30,000 and $40,000. And through a little negotiations between a member of the Finance Committee or who was not a member of the Finance Committee at the time of negotiations, we were able to work out an agreement which was mutually agreeable and beneficial, as we thought, to both parties. And this was basically caused by a situation where the treasurer collector operated on his own. He answered only to the voters. He was not part of the compensation policy. And as far as determining how many hours or how much vacation time there was, the individual, there was no record of when this was. By the same token, the town had no record of it either. So basically, we were able to negotiate a situation for 2 weeks. I believe it's 2 weeks. It's less than $2,500, but it's close there too. And we felt and discussed with the manager the basic options and all, that this was the expedient way to proceed with this. And that is why the Finance Committee voted to recommend this transfer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for all of the time and effort and conversations that you personally had, and also that the Finance Committee engaged in on this very difficult and sensitive topic. It certainly was not our intent to put you in the unfortunate position you were put in.
That's why we get the big buck, Brett.
That's right. That's why you control all the money, Paul.
That's not true. That's not true.
No, sorry. Yeah, don't quote me on that. I'm just kidding, folks. So thank you for that. And Derek walked me through, the risk as well. And I mean, I think the bottom line is that, legal counsel is recommending this as, essentially what would be a very small settlement in an otherwise costly potential litigation. And so, if I personally am in a tough spot, because it's surprising to me that we're even having this conversation. and I don't support paying this out. I don't think that there is, the challenge is that there's no precedent for this in our town.
Yes, there is. There is, believe it or not.
For paying an elected position outgoing vacation time. That is.
I'm going to pass this off to Mr. Manager, if I may.
So I would say that you're both right. There is no precedent, to my knowledge, of paying an outgoing elected official a vacation buyout. However, there is a past practice of when Kelly was the elected town clerk, and then she moved from elected to appointed town clerk, and she had just shy of 10 years in that position, and she was starting her new role as the appointed town clerk, and the town had awarded her 2 weeks of vacation to start her new role as the appointed position. So it was really there that we used that as a conversation starter with the outgoing treasurer collector so that we could resolve this issue. As everyone has pointed out, and as council has educated us, that although we know that we had substantial evidence to not have to pay this, we also know at the same time that it would cost us tenfold to defend this through litigation. So again, this is probably not the best way we wanted to resolve this issue, but we thought it was certainly in the best interest of the taxpayers to try to put this to bed and to move forward.
Could I make a comment?
Yes, please.
When Kelly was given the, what was it, a 2-week vacation, Derek? That was because she was continuing in her position. Where this is different, where he is retiring. And I personally don't feel that any vacation pay is due. Being in the position myself when it happened with me, I knew all along as an elected official I didn't get a paid vacation. And I just think it's wrong, but what I want to do is what's best for the town. I don't want them to pay the triple damages or legal fees or the amount of money it's going to take the staff to present evidence. It's just easier to pay it and get beyond it. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Maureen. Steve, anything else? Before I open it up or pass it to you, Steve, there's certain things that I personally am just principled on, and this is one of them. So, I don't support paying this $2,500, but that's, I just wanted to make sure that understood that.
Yeah, again, I think we just need to move on. I want to solve problems. I don't want it to snowball. And if you have something that could create a $30,000 exposure, it's foolish to fight it for $2,500. So I think we should just move past this. Let's look at the rest of these transfers, and if we don't have any problem, let's motion and get on to our next warrant article. All right, next agenda article, I should say. I just feel, we're beating it up pretty good. Yeah, it's not ideal, but it is what it is.
Brett, can
I have no problem with voting the list of transfers as a total.
Okay. Any other questions for what's on here? I don't think we have to have any additional conversation on the treasurer collector, the transfer number 4. Do folks have questions on any of the other transfers?
Not me.
I do not. I'm good with all of them.
Okay, so let's hold that transfer 4 and then vote on everything else, please.
Do you want to hold transfer 4, or are we going to vote it as is?
I'm not going to support it, so we can vote everyone but that, as I assume all three of us will support them unanimously, and then we'll just hold that transfer 4 out and vote on that separately.
Okay.
I would make a motion that we vote the transfers as presented on the list as a total, except for transfer 4.
Second the motion, Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action on those, Sandy.
Okay, and I will make a motion that we approve transfer number 4 for $2,500 town council expense to treasurer collector's salary.
I'll second. Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Stephen Metellian, aye.
Brett Simus, nay. Majority action. Thank you, folks.
What?
Go back. Let me pull up my agenda here. One sec. Next item on here is.
Can I make one comment on that this situation?
As long as it's not transfer 4, you can.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor anything we just talked about, Paul. Is there some new information or something about the next agenda item?
No, I was going to make a comment on number 4. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, we voted on it. I don't know that we need any more.
I got 2 sentences.
If you would like to say something, then go ahead, Paul. I don't want to.
It can never happen again in the town because there are no other positions that fall into this type of a situation, period.
And we're going to write a policy to make sure that that holds true, because over the years or decades, things may change where we shift an appointed position to an elected position, and those things can change. So I would recommend that we have a policy in place so that we're protected and it's clear going forward should this ever occur. But I absolutely agree with you, Paul. It shouldn't have happened to begin with. It's an unfortunate position that we were all put in, and we have to make sure it doesn't happen again. It's a bit embarrassing, frankly. Okay. Motion to accept grants. We've got a couple of grants in here. Chief DeFranzo, do you want to talk about both of these, please?
Sure. Which one would you like to talk about first?
How about the Assistant to Firefighters grant for the AFGS, the COVID?
Okay. When COVID occurred, the legislature of the United States put together that CARES Act, and out of that CARES Act, $100 million was put aside and put into the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program, and they called it the AFG Supplemental COVID Grant Program. So the thought was we put in for some PPE to bolster our supplies. So we put the grant request in. You know, again, it didn't hurt to ask. If you don't ask, you don't know. So we were lucky enough to be awarded a grant. There were over 2,100 applications. About 900 were funded, so we're pretty lucky that we got this grant. It's a matching grant, just like the other Assistance to Firefighters grant we were awarded about a year or so ago, but our match is only $202, roughly. So for $202 to get over $4,000 worth of equipment, I think is well worth the $202. So what the grant request was for was to get us some fully encapsulating suits. As we were going through this COVID, we had gowns and face masks and, you know, all the basic PPE, but the staff was concerned about, you know, their footwear, the lower half of their pants and those types of things. So we thought it best to put in for full types of suits so that they don't have to worry about their clothes and that they're not coming in contact with any types of diseases. So the two types of suits, one was a very high level type of suit for bloodborne pathogen type situations that they may come across, and then there was a suit that was just below that grade, which was going to be more than adequate for COVID type patients. And then the last thing we asked for was some reusable eye protection, and it's a high-level type of eye protection that we're able to clean, disinfect, and reuse. So those were the items that we'd asked for. So the total award that we got was $4,229. And out of that, like I said, the town share will be $201.38. So I'm looking for the Board of Selectmen to approve the grant for us to start to order these supplies. And with that, when I order this, I'm not sure when we're going to get it, but at least our order is in, and as soon as it becomes available, we would get delivery of the product material.
You on mute, Brett?
Yeah. Any questions for Chief? That sounds great. Thank you.
No, I have no questions. It's always good news to receive a grant such as this one.
I have no questions, and thank you for applying, Chief.
Very good. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much. I will take a motion, please.
I would make a motion to accept the Assistance to Firefighters Grant COVID AFGS for $4,229 with the understanding that the town has to come up with the $201.38.
I second the motion. Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action.
Thank you. Now the second grant opportunity, and I still see Dan Lazar's on the webinar here, so I'll let him go into more detail, but he was lucky enough to find a grant from the New England Society for Fire Prevention Engineers, and with the Grafton Upton Railroad expansion project, the thought was that we would try to be a little more technologically advanced with pre-planning and understanding some of the products that they may or may not have down there at a given time. So he, along with two firefighters who are also part of the emergency management group, Seth Grill and Connor Schultz, put this grant application together, and we were successful in getting the grant, which will pay for one iPad and the software, which is the key piece to the puzzle, the BlazeMark pre-fire planning software. So with these two items, we'll be able to hopefully put together a good listing of materials that they may have down there at a given time, along with a pre-plan that is readily accessible, not just by the iPad, but anybody that we can get access to that BlazeMark software program. So unless Dan has other information or details to add, that's the basics of that particular grant that they got.
Yeah, Chief, I'll add just one quick item, which is the BlazeMark software that we, as a group, pulled together with yourself, Seth, Connor, and myself. Thankfully, is coming from a vendor that has pre-fire planned more than a dozen of these throughout the Northeast, and I think one or two in Colorado. So they're going to bring a lot of expertise to us as part of that software service, and it's all cloud hosted. The goal would be to be completely 21st century oriented and be able to access vital information electronically online before you're leaving the fire station about what's where and what's going on from an inventory standpoint. That's all I have.
And it looks like there's no match to this grant, so it's just the entirety of the $1,700, which is great.
I don't think you guys can't hear me over Maureen, can you? Or can you hear me?
I can hear you.
No, you're breaking in and out. Like,
I think it's feedback from your mic, Maureen, but that's fine. Okay, great. Any other questions on this? This is again great stuff, obviously. So I'll take a motion from Steve or Maureen.
I move that we accept the fire protection grant for the BlazeMark pre-fire planning software and iPad for $1,700.
I second the motion. Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. right, thank you. Thank you very
Again,
much.
thank you. And then there is one other grant that we applied for, and it was a mutual grant through the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security's office. They had put aside $4 million to help local police and fire departments in preparing for and responding to coronavirus type events. So in speaking with Chief Bradley, he really didn't have any items to really think about. So I had suggested we try to put in for a disinfecting machine. We were actually lucky enough, a resident in town loaned us a piece of equipment to use, which because of its age failed. And we were kind of left without a good disinfecting device. And we were following the CDC guidelines, but you're spraying and letting it try to sit. And we're not sure we're getting everywhere we need to get. So our staff, the industrious people that we have here, had seen some articles in trade magazines about other departments using an SCBA with an autobody paint sprayer and putting the chemical product in that, creating the right mist as best as possible, and then using that to help with the disinfection process. So we've been using that since, but here was an opportunity for us to get the right piece of equipment, hopefully, by applying for a grant through the state. So that grant request is in. Again, that would not be a matching grant. If we're lucky enough to get that, they would pay for the equipment that we put in for. And that was just over $2,000 for that disinfecting machine that we'd be looking for. But that machine would also, besides doing ambulances, would be able to do all our fire trucks, the police cars, the dispatch center, any of the other living quarters or areas the staff uses heavily, and that whether the police chief or I felt needed to be, deeply disinfected, we'd have, good, reliable equipment that would, be able to do that and, provide some level of safety and security for the staff. So that's what we've asked for. And again, I don't know when we'll see that. The anticipated award announcements are supposed to be somewhere in the beginning of August, and the award period wouldn't be able to spend it till after September 1st. But just to make you aware that that grant request has been put in case someone asks, you have the knowledge that we did that.
That's great. Awesome. That'd be a great piece of equipment to get. So great. All right. Any other questions or comments before we go on to donations?
Not from me.
Nope, none.
Okay, great. Thank you. So next we have the approving acceptance of a donation to the Elder Services Upton Senior Center. There was a donation from the Massachusetts 4-H Foundation in the amount of $500. They were going to use it to purchase items for the food pantry in the Upton Center. So a great donation, always appreciated, and great work for Janice to build the relationships in the community. And certainly 4-H is a great example here to solicit and receive these donations. So that's great.
Yep, great work.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, I can make a motion. I will make a motion that we approve the donation from the Massachusetts 4-H Foundation in the amount of $500 to be used to purchase food pantry items at the Upton Senior Center. Stephen Metellian, aye.
Maureen Donnell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Unanimous action. Great. All right. Next item on the agenda is the financial reserves policy. This is something, Derek, I'll ask you to give us some context and background and perspective on before we open the discussion to the board and solicit input from other boards and committees as needed. This is a conversation that started probably a year or so ago. We've adopted various components of financial policies over the past year. This is one that we have slated for discussion for this evening. So Derek, do you want to give us the primer here?
Sure. Great. Thank you all. So as the chairman pointed out, I'm going to try to scroll through this a little bit. You can see it on your screen. This financial reserve policy was discussed at length, I want to say February of 2019, with the Finance Committee. They spent a lot of time looking at the percentages, really thinking about the best way we could manage our reserves. Well, I should say manage our free cash and strengthen our reserves so that we can weather those rainy days. And I would start by saying that the commitment the Finance Committee has made to building up the general stabilization account has bared its fruit this past town meeting when we had sufficient reserves to help subsidize the escalating costs of the school department. And that's really speaks volumes of the fiscal stewardship that has been brought forward by the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen over the past 2 years. But this policy really is to memorialize, I think, what has been already transpiring the last 2 years as it relates to our reserves. I had a very detailed conversation this afternoon with an individual who has over 40 years experience in municipal finance, and just trying to brainstorm some of the expectations by rating agencies today. And one thing he wanted me to impress upon the board this evening was that you may all look at reserve policies across multiple communities in Massachusetts, and you may see reserve policies that suggest that communities need to try to achieve a goal of 5% of their overall operating expenses be placed in reserves. You'll see here this evening that there's a recommendation that the town of Upton tried to achieve 12 to 15% of the operating budget to be placed into reserves. So I guess the first question is, well, how do we get from 5 to 12? And so this conversation I had today brought to light that pre-Great Recession in 2009, that was the recommendation, 5%. But what rating agencies found during that recession period was that municipalities were not prepared or well equipped to manage their finances during these economic downturns. And so what rating agencies are requesting, and I will quote the consultant who said that rating agencies are expecting the floor, not the ceiling, the floor to be a minimum of 10%. So you'll see that we're just north of that at 12 to 15% is kind of a range that we are expecting. And that 12 to 15% is a combination of our free cash after we have expended a certain percentage of our free cash, and I'll speak to that in just 1 minute. And it's also what we have in stabilization. And remember, we used approximately $250,000 this past town meeting from our general stabilization to cover our education costs. So you'll see here in the policy, I'll scroll through it, that we've been doing very well the last 2.5 years in free cash, and I would expect similar certifications this fall with our free cash, that we aim to maintain our free cash of 4 to 6% of the annual budget. But then when we look at that number as a total sum, how can we be good managers and fiscal stewards of our taxpayers' dollars? And so what you'll see here is that we're trying to be very intentional on how we will then reappropriate that free cash. And you'll see that whatever that free cash number comes in, whether that's $1.5 million or $1 million, this policy recommends that 10% of that automatically go into general stabilization until we can hit that 10% floor that I had just mentioned. Then the free cash, we would then appropriate 60% of that free cash to manage our one-time expenses. So, as you know, this is our articles that you typically see in the spring and fall town meeting. This is how we're buying our fire trucks. This is how we're buying our radios this past spring and our turnout gear. This is how we're buying the dump trucks for the DPW. We're using one-time cash so that we don't have to go ahead and borrow. If we were to diminish our free cash returns, it limits our ability to acquire these by not having to borrow. Therefore, we would then have to go ahead and borrow, and we would be beholden to any interest rates at that time. And so then lastly, good fiscal management is to maintain the remaining 30% in the free cash reserves so that money is available if there was an emergency that had taken place during the course of that year. That could be anything from an infrastructure emergency, like a water or sewer break that needed emergency repairs, or any other emergency. And that 30%, just so folks know, if it goes unused, it just rolls forward into the following year's free cash. So moving on for stabilization, as I had just mentioned earlier, we are proposing the goal of maintaining the general stabilization account to be minimum 10%, and then reaching that 12 to 14% would be covered by the free cash reserves that are remaining after all expenditures. I spoke this morning also to the DPW director because, as you can see here, this policy covers all of our reserves, which include our retained earnings. We have two retained earnings accounts. That's in the water enterprise and the sewer enterprise. And this proposes to maintain a reserve amount, again, for our capital expenditures of 15 to 20%. After talking to Dennis Westgate, he believes that is certainly a realistic goal and is committed to meeting that goal. And so this last paragraph just covers the overlay surplus, which every year is allocated to the Board of Assessors so that they can manage any property tax abatements or exemptions that are filed during the course of that year. Pending any questions, I'll turn this back over to the chairman.
I did have one quick question, a few of them, but I'll just start with one quick one, which is getting back to stabilization. Why not co-join those two? Why not take your capital stabilization, try to simplify this, and put both stabilizations together, general and capital, and appropriate, obviously if you're trying to get to an overall of 12 and you're trying to get to a stabilization of 10, I think come January we were actually over 10% if you join those two funds. So if we had I think it was 2.2 million in January in stabilization after the transfer in November, and I think we had 200,000 in regular stabilization, or I'm sorry, capital stabilization.
Yes.
So we had, Ken, you can give me the exact number, but we were slightly north of 200,000 for capital stabilization and slightly north of 2 million for general stabilization prior to town meeting.
Yeah, so prior to town meeting, the general stabilization was 2.2 million. There was a transfer of 259,000, so it's just shy under 2 million for the general stabilization account. And that's correct. The capital is 200,000.
I think Steve's question was around why the two different stabilization accounts.
Brett, a question or comment to the chair?
Yeah, hold on one sec, Brooke. We have a pending question on the floor. Thank you.
I can comment on that.
Go ahead, Kenny.
I was just going to say, most communities, they do have separate stabilization accounts for a specific purpose. And actually, the Mass General Law that sets up the stabilization accounts, they do recommend having a separate purpose for each stabilization. So you would have a general stabilization essentially for a rainy day. So in the town, if there's state aid shortfall, there's local aid receipts shortfall, generally a lot of communities, they do tap into the general stabilization and not the capital, because the capital serves for another different purpose. So for example, let's say we need to purchase a new ambulance, or we need to purchase new equipment, you would look at the capital stabilization and not the general stabilization. So general stabilization, essentially, it's a rainy day. Generally, if there's a operating budget issue that can be solved through one-time monies, generally that's where a lot of communities they look at as far as solving those issues. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and if I could just piggyback on that, if I could, there are other stabilization accounts that can be created. Like, for example, I worked in one community that they created a road stabilization account that was specifically to repair streets and sidewalks, and how they funded that stabilization account by any excess excise taxes that were generated was put into that account. So there are, as Kenny pointed out, there are lots of different stabilization accounts that can be created for very specific purposes.
Right. I think what I'm kind of alluding to, and Brett, if you could just let me kind of go with this for a little bit.
Absolutely, sir.
Knowing what we know, knowing that I believe it was 88% of our revenue comes from taxation, and we have that, I think it was 548,000 that comes from basically cherry sheet offsets. Knowing that we're that heavy on taxes, knowing that we also create that much in free cash come November, I can understand the stabilization, but what are we really trying to ensure with capital stabilization, right? All of our equipment would be insured. If a truck blew up and it's a $200,000 truck, we have insurance on that truck. So I don't really understand what we're really trying. Ultimately, stabilization's insurance. It's rainy day money, as you said. But how does it make sense to keep again, I know that you can set up 5 different stabilizations, but in order to simplify our monetary system here, and how little the actual call would be, it's not like we have bridges and, again, buildings would be insured. Most of those things are insured. So I'm not sure how it makes sense to keep a separate capital stabilization account, not just join them together. We, as a team, understand that we have that one pool of money to draw from in the event of rainy day. Again, let's just assume that $300,000 did get cut in state aid. Derek, if we'll use that as an example. If that $300K got cut, we would take it out of general stabilization, right? If we had a problem and let's just say a fire truck broke down and we needed substantial dollars to fix it, most likely in the past, we've always paid out of free cash. If we needed to, we could just pay it out of stabilization. Again, assuming it was a catastrophic problem that was, unforeseen. Again, I just think it's much simpler, easier to read. It registers in the DLS dashboard. I just think it's much easier to calculate that if we could, and simplify the matter as far as the basic framework.
So I don't disagree with you, Steve. I think that again, as Kenny pointed out, these are created for a specific purpose. And what was the question we really have to ask ourselves is, the town created at some point in time a capital stabilization account, and what was the purpose? So during my 3 years in town, we have never contributed to that capital stabilization account. Now, if I was going to go back 5 years in time and this stabilization account was created, and we could foreshadow the need for a library or a senior center, we would have continued to deposit a certain percentage of our free cash into that capital stabilization in hopes that we would have built it up to 1.2, $1.5 million, so that when we go ahead next year to have to borrow, say, $8 million to construct this building, we would pull directly from the capital stabilization to lower any borrowing. But I think your point is well taken. There's really never been that second step after the capital stabilization was created to have contributed to that on an annual and a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Good. Other questions, Steve?
Can I just add one more thing?
I think Kenny and Rick may want to speak, and then I can kind of dig back in a little bit.
Yeah, I want to hear from Paul. I want to hear from Rick. I want to hear from Kenny. So we can go around the horn here. But go ahead, Kenny, and Maureen as well, obviously.
I just want to piggyback on Derek. I mean, generally, the capital stabilization fund generally, it's usually the first funding source for a capital plan. Generally, that's where they look first to see. So, departments' requests, and it could also be equipment, as well. It could be at the fire department or police department or DPW. So generally, what I've seen in my travels, generally, like the capital plan, usually the first funding source is the capital stabilization. And then they look also at borrowing. And then they also do look at the general stabilization to see if there's any funding sources, various funding sources. But I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, seeing as I've been around, I guess I've been around here the longest of anybody on this call. I can put a bit of history to this. As Derek alluded to, we've had more than one stabilization account. You may recall that, I don't know how many years ago it was, and it was the result of the override, which we passed, and then Mendon did not pass it, and we ended up with somewhere of a delta of $400,000 and almost $500,000 that we did not have to spend because of the formula regarding school funding. So probably way back then, the right thing to do would have been to do an underride and remove that amount of money from the levy limit. But for the people in charge at the time decided we would not do that. So what we did is we took that delta, now the amount of money between what we raised in the override and what our obligation was to fund the school for that year, and we put that into a school stabilization account with the express intent of saying that, well, we know there's going to be another override coming, or there's going to be something come up, and we can use that money. And coming back, that is why I pushed so hard back in April and May, whenever it was, to use the stabilization money to fund the school deficits rather than going to an override. We had told the people how many years ago it was that we're going to hold this money and use it just for the schools. Well, that probably lasted about 3 years, and then somebody got the great idea, well, let's combine these monies. So when you basically look at that whole bottom line of main stabilization, $450,000 of that came from this override that was for the school. All right. So you're kind of muddying up the waters by saying how much money there is. That $450,000 for that, let's just use that for the exact, for the sake of discussion. That stayed in the stabilization account. All right. Now you come back and you say, okay, how are things going to go going forward? Yes, it would be nice to have the capacity to put X amount of dollars into capital stabilization, all right? Depending on where the numbers come in the end of when I say the end of the year, when we come to October and November, and we come to a town meeting, I would think that there would be a discussion about putting more money into capital stabilization. All right, and how we spend this money and where it goes and how it's applied. I believe this is a direct conversation that should be had, and it goes along with the manager's plan for the formulation of this financial team that he envisions. All right. The stabilization with respect to everything that's going along right now, that's going to be our salvation, I believe. All right. Nobody knows what's happening. You're probably not going to looking for a budget from the state until probably September. All right. And this is something that usually happens by July. I know I'm digressing, but any school superintendent in this state, I don't know how much they're paying them, but right now they're earning their money, what they have to do to figure things out. Back to the basic issue. I don't really think you can have too much stabilization, okay? And again, the purpose of these is to cover the rainy day. Just let me throw one other thing out there. If you did, I think Derek referred to, if you had a catastrophe, and let's say, for example, you blew the dam down on the dam road up River Street, or you lost the dam at Main Street by the pizza place. All right, that is an emergency. It has to be taken care of. Absent stabilization, the selectmen declare an emergency, and whatever happens there gets added to the tax rate without regard to Proposition 2.5. And I think I'm right on that. Can I just ask the Mr. Accountant to clarify on that to see if I am correct on that? He's not there.
I'm sorry, Paul, can you repeat that?
I said that.
Paul, can you repeat that?
If you had a catastrophe, let's say you blew the dam at one of the places where we have a dam, and something had to be done, and you did not have the sufficient assets to do it, or capital to do it, it could just be added to the recap sheet without regard to Proposition 2.5, and you raise that money regardless. Am I right there?
Well, first we would need an emergency order from DOR,
Right.
and then we would have to work with them.
But go ahead.
We would have to come up with a financing plan. I mean, some of it would probably need to be borrowed. They would probably help us with that through the State House, but we would have to figure out how we would pay for it. I've seen it happen in other communities. Generally, it's done through a borrowing, and then the state would help us any way that they could. But I would say probably first would be a borrowing. I don't think we would pay for all of it in 1 year, unless we had the means to do that.
But again, there are situations where something can be added to the recap sheet just by declaration of emergency. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and DOR would allow that. They would allow that. We would get permission from them.
So, given the situation that you had adequate reserves, that this is something you could cover yourself without going to borrowing or anything going to this. So,
Okay.
Right, but just one quick question on that same, just because that particular topic is an interesting topic. Let's just say that, let's play that scenario out for a minute. Kenny, could you use a bond anticipation note for a 1 year borrow to fix that item and I don't know, let's make up a number. Let's say it's $750,000 to fix a bridge that somehow gets destroyed or a dam that somehow gets destroyed. Can you do a 1 year borrow on a bond anticipation note?
You could. All it's really doing is just buying you time, because once it matures, either you have to pay it down or you would have to make a payment. They call it a pay down. You'd have to make a principal and interest payment on it. But really, all a band does, any borrowing, all it really does is it just gives you more time. figure out how you're going to pay for that.
Could I ask one question, Brett?
Yes, please, go ahead, Maureen.
Of Kenny.
And we'll hand it over to Rick next. Thanks.
On a bond anticipation note, you have to have an authorization at town meeting, correct?
Correct. Yes, there's a lengthy process. I mean, bond counsel would have to review it. It would go to town meeting to authorize the treasurer to go out and borrow. And then, yes, then you would, the treasurer would go out and receive bids on that ban or that state house note or the general obligation bond. But yes, there is a lengthy process as far as issuing debt, which I'm very familiar with. So it takes a while.
If it's a catastrophe and we're past the town meeting process, we are not able to go to a bond anticipation note.
I have seen there are times where DOR may assist us and approve something like that. It may be a very rare occasion, but they may help us with that.
But if we had reserve funds, the Department of Revenue would look at those first before they would authorize any bond anticipation note.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Which would still need to go to town meeting. So you can't spend out of free cash or stabilization without town meeting. So either way, your town meeting is your first course of action. How you pay is subjective.
Yeah. First, we would, if DOR approved it and we came up with a plan how to pay for it, they would allow. I mean, if it was an emergency and they approved it, but we would have to come up with a plan. So then at town meeting, we would have to figure out how we would pay for that. So we would have to have an article for that. So either it would be borrowing or reserves or a combination of, as far as for, paying for those items, whatever the emergency, is declared.
But in lieu of a town meeting, we would have to deficit spend until that town meeting, correct?
Correct. And the only, so snow and ice, you can deficit spend, that's allowable. And the other deficit spending that's allowable is through DOR. So DOR would have to approve it. And again, we would have to, Board of Selectmen, town manager, we would have to work with DOR as far as, identifying funding sources and how we would pay for it. So that would be a long, lengthy discussion and process.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you, Kenny.
You're welcome.
I'd like to hand it over to Rick from the Capital Budget Committee perspective.
Okay. Do you by any chance have that PDF that could be projected? Or let me just talk through it since we're getting late. What we did on the Capital Committee is have been looking at the DLS directive, the financial reserve policy. Reason for that is we brought on one new person last year. We're bringing on two new ones who've been working to put together some primer, if you will, that basically gets the group in one spot quickly and get them up to speed. But just to say a couple things, back to Derek's point earlier, back with the 2008-2009 crisis, we were in a situation where towns didn't look like they could meet they had deficits, didn't look like they could meet their requirements. The DLS stepped in, and that's the Division of Local Services. And they recommended what they called the best practices for the various towns. And they started looking at towns and looking at how they weathered the storm, were they successful. So what they did in turn was put together best practices template, which is one of that was the financial reserve policy. It told you how to generate reserves and also how to use those reserves, how to spend them, how do you spend the free cash with guidelines. So that's what happened. We have to commend Derek because he was on the avant-garde on that. We started this probably with the Finance Committee maybe 2 years ago. Finance Committee approved it, as we mentioned, about 1.5 years ago. But also, I have some actual numbers that we worked up, and these were worked up with Kenny Costa and Ken Glowacki back in the February-March timeframe. So what we did is we took snapshot of where we were financial reserves wise. We ended up in FY17 in free cash, we had just about $1.1 million. In FY20, that was right around January 30th, we had increased free cash to almost 2.2 million, an increase of about 100%. General stabilization went from 1.2 million in 17 up to 2.25 million. That was an 88% increase. How did that happen? We've been looking for the last 2.5 years at this financial reserve policy and started putting actions in place. So we increased these reserves. So we right now are at a point where our combined reserves, that's free cash and that's stabilization. Our combined reserves are 18.71%. There's 9.3% right now in free cash. Remember, this is a snapshot in time. This was effective January 30th, but it reflects where we've been. So on a general stabilization fund, in the February timeframe, we had 9.5% towards that 10% minimum goal. So we were in good shape. We ended up, as Kenny said, spending $261K. As we look at best practices and what DLS recommends, yes, they talk about 3 to 5% on net operating revenue, 8 to 10% on operating budget. What they do bring out and talk about is capital stabilization fund or capital improvement fund, call it what you may. And that is that for your moderate range capital expenditures, such as police cars, building improvements, HVAC, we've been through it with roofs and all this other, that they send up a capital stabilization, capital improvement fund, they put money in there. Best practices coming from DLS really recommends that we put in place a capital stabilization fund and we actually fund it to some percentage. So that's that. And the other thing, so where are we? Well, we've increased Derek's policy, and many other communities have a similar policy where their combined reserves should be between 12 and 15% from a policy perspective. We exceeded that goal in FY20. We are 18.7% of combined reserves versus the target we put in place about 2.5 years ago. So we've done what we said. We anticipated, well, this economic boom is not going to last beyond the 9 years. Also, we wanted to be in a situation where, knowing that was going to be building projects coming, we wanted to get the best interest rates. The other thing that the Capital Improvement Committee is really looking at is suggesting that we also put in place, create Capital Improvement Stabilization Fund and fund it annually, maybe to 1 or 2% of the budget. That's a topic for discussion. We've kind of been nibbling around the edge right now, but that's something we should seriously consider. And some of the historians in town have told us that 5-6 years ago, we did have funds where we set aside, for instance, if we needed a police car for $10,000, each year we put over 5 years, $2,000, $2,000, $2,000, and at the end, you had your 10 for your new police car coming out of what was the equivalent of a stabilization, capital improvement stabilization. I don't believe they physically created that fund, but the concept was there. And I think Paul's aware of that. I mean, I think as I heard it, he was one of the fellows that implemented that. Now, the other thing that I did on that PowerPoint I sent out is I put in benchmarks for 3 towns, and those benchmarks were what the Division of Local Services called their 3 best practices communities. And I use these 3 because they have regional school systems. 2 of them do anyway. Raleigh was there. Their combined reserves 10 to 14%. They're putting 1% into capital stabilization. The other town that's really considered sort of the standard that all others are compared against is West Newbury. They're putting 7 to 10% into their general stabilization, and they are putting, they have a capital improvement stabilization. They also created a school building stabilization, and they have, of course, the retirement stabilization. West Newbury is considered by the Division of Local Services as the standards that all other towns should be measured against. Whether it's right or wrong, and it's a recommendation, but it's something that we as a team should consider. And we've kind of talked around it, but it's probably a good thing to do. But if you look at where we've been, we have done a phenomenal job over the last 3 years getting to Derek's goal of a minimum of 10%. We hit 9.8, and we are in very good shape on combined reserves. And it turns out what we thought would be good, prudent management then turns out to be an even better decision now, looking at the current situation. But the capital committee supports this going forward. But the concern we have is that we ought to consider funding a capital, call it what you will, improvement, stabilization fund or capital, just to cover the fire trucks that break down, the small trucks. And that stabilization fund is there so that moderate term loans can be funded out of this, and it saves your big projects like your community centers, your DPWs. That's where you go after the long-term bonds.
Could I ask one more question, Brett?
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, so appreciate that. So yes, Maureen, I want to answer questions that you and Steve have, and also would love to take a couple of minutes and open it up to anyone in the public that would like to share a comment. We'll keep those comments limited to no more than a few minutes. We'll put a cap of 5 minutes on it. But yes, Maureen, go ahead, please.
Maybe this is for Kenny. We do have a capital fund, right, Kenny, that has, what, 200 and some odd $1,000 in it?
That's correct. We do.
So potentially, could the town turn that into a capital stabilization fund?
It already is. It's already created as a capital stabilization.
We already have
Correct.
a capital stabilization fund in answer to Rick's suggestion to create one. So we already have created. We just have to keep
Correct.
funding it every year, right?
Yeah, we just.
Got it.
And then I think the idea would be that we would use, the capital budget committee would assist in planning how those funds would be allocated as we move through time, at least from a recommendation perspective.
Yes, in fact, we had 192,000 in 2017. We have 201,000 today, FY20. Just we haven't funded it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Derek. I saw your hand. I see your finger, Paul. So Derek, why don't you go ahead first?
I just wanted to note that I think I want to walk everybody kind of through this process, and I think Rick's points are well taken. So currently we stand around, if we look at that policy, the current environment, we're about 11% in reserves, and this was after town meeting. But I think that what we're really talking about is what do we do moving forward? So free cash gets certified in October, right? In this policy, we're suggesting that 60% of our free cash goes towards capital. So we're not always going to have rolling stock capital needs or FF&E capital needs. So say we only have to use half of that 60%. I think to Rick's point and a lot of the other points, that other half of that 60% could be shifted over into the capital stabilization account, because we do know at some point in the future we are going to exceed our needs are going to exceed our free cash. And so if we have a commitment to build the capital stabilization account, we'll always be able to be flexible to respond to those needs. And like I mentioned earlier, the buildings, which cost the most money, if we were to build up the capital stabilization to such an amount, we certainly would be able to borrow much less, in which, this will take us back to the conversation about our tax rate and keeping our tax rate at a level that is realistic and it's affordable by our residents.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Sorry, Mr. Flaherty, go ahead, please. Sorry.
I just want to elaborate on what Rick had alluded to earlier. Yeah, way back, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe, could be 25. Before I get there, you made reference to a police car. For the last 20 years, gotta be 15 anyway, that there is one police car. This is the way the department operates. One police car is rolled over every year. So every year there is a budget item in the line item, which is replacing a cruiser. All right. And every 2 or 3 years, I think we used to replace a second one through a special article. And then somehow or other, one of the vehicles got totaled, and we got a new one through insurance, and that's through the rotation off as far as our purchasing them. So that's still out there. But back to what Rick was saying, I can remember we bought dump trucks and we bought ambulances. And this is when we weren't paying $165,000 or $185,000 to $200,000 for an ambulance. But we'd put money away for 3 or 4 years, knowing that this was coming. We used to buy capital trucks, 10-wheelers or dump trucks. And we didn't buy 10-wheelers back then, but we'd buy 5-ton dump trucks, and we'd do a lease purchase agreement so that we'd pay X amount of money over 5 years. And then at some point we stopped doing that. It was something that the treasurer collector at the time didn't think was a prudent thing to do. So we changed the way that we bought those. But yeah, going way back, we did put money away, but that was a different time. Okay, that was a different time. The demands weren't as great on the budget as they are now. All right.
Thank you.
Can I just jump on to that for a second, Brett?
Yep, of course.
And that's the other issue is more and more items are built into the budget. So, for instance, turnout gear now is being built into the budget. So it's not showing up as a warrant article. Radio maintenance, here's a one-time purchase on radios back in at our annual town meeting, I believe it was $159,000. There's going to be some maintenance that will be associated with that. But as we keep building our budget, again, police cruiser is built into the budget. So as we keep doing that, the downside to doing that is we are levying a lot of money on the people. Our budget, I looked it up just a few years ago, the 2019 annual budget was $21,505,000. We're just at $24,400,000. So we've picked up almost $3 million in additional expenditures. So having said that, we also know there was a email that came around to all of us, I'm sure, probably 2 months ago. Upton is the 4th highest average tax bill in the valley behind Hopkinton, Medway, Millis. We're 95% residential. So building reserves, I understand it. Yes, I get it. It's just the percentages, I believe, are way too high for a community of our makeup, our composition. And also realizing that Mendon does not, I'm going to use the term squirrel away money like we do. So, this is a great plan. Everybody's put a lot of work in. I don't agree with the numbers. I don't agree with the rate and percentage rates of the stabilization figures. Again, just based on how well we're insured and how well we're positioned, and keeping in mind, it's 95% on the back of the taxpayer, not counting excise tax bills. So now you get into, it's not really 95% on the back of the taxpayer. It's probably 96 or 97%. So we've got to be very careful. It's the number one complaint I hear around town. And I know not everybody hears it, but that is absolutely the number one complaint is our tax bills, not the rate, not the percentage, not the, it's the tax bill that is hurting the people. I really feel like it's hurting us as far as marketability to small business. I think that's one of the reasons that you see all the towns around us, they're getting commercial investment in their towns, and with very little exception, we have not. So great to do all this, but you keep jamming that tax bill higher and higher, and you are not attracting those businesses. So you've got to weigh that into the equation.
Thank you, Steve. Dan, I think you wanted to step in here.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. This has been a great conversation. I think the good point, I'll reiterate what Rick has said regarding Derek and the FinCom really taking the time to put us in a good position. This is a good problem, not a bad problem. But I do agree with, you got to look at the numbers. I mean, Derek talks about 11%, Rick talks about 18%. When we're looking at some of these other best practices communities, as we were looking at capital planning and how it fits into overall financial planning, most of this, like the West Newbury, for example, does a really great job integrating their school system into that plan. And it's planned out over time. We don't do that here. I've been here for 22 years. We do not plan that far ahead. If we do, it's been a few people and behind the scenes. So I think that's a good thing. I think from a standpoint of, I'm a proponent of the capital stabilization account, and actually trying to do all your less than $100,000 capital and plan them. Not just pile money in there, but actually have a plan to spend that money over the next 5 to 10 years for things you know are coming. The dump truck, the fire truck, the ambulance, a roof, a mechanical system. I'm in the building industry. You can't do much with less than $100,000 in a building in this day and age. And we're also in the world too, where fire apparatus can easily, with how modern they are and all the requirements that are in them, could have a $25,000 or $30,000 repair pretty easily, as they get older. And Mr. Flaherty's talking about $185,000, $200,000 ambulance. That ambulance today is $300,000. The stretcher costs $30,000. I mean, so this is the things we're talking about. I mean, I think the getting the planning aspect and planning it out a little further in a 5 to 10 year range and capturing things so we don't have to struggle to put an article to replace a HVAC compressor at the fire station is crazy. That's like when I first came here and we used to have articles to buy a personal computer for somebody's desk at town hall. Some of this stuff is just part of doing business, but I would agree with Selectman Italian's position of the numbers. The numbers have to have the school system. At the end of the day, the school system is 57% of the budget. So they're 13 million, and the town's the 11 million side of the enterprise. So I think it's really important to talk about that and organize it in that manner and communicate to the citizens in that manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other folks from the community that would like to speak, please. So,
Brett, can I throw one other thing in here?
Yep. Is there anyone else? And then yes, Paul. Okay. Yep. Go ahead, Paul. I don't see anyone else here. Go ahead.
I don't want to come off as a defender of the school, but you have to keep in mind that, there's other things that go into the school budget, which is one of the big drivers in our budgets. But there's this thing that the school has to deal with. It's called minimum local contribution and municipal growth factor. Okay? These are things over which you or the townspeople have absolutely no control. And they're what drives these budgets. Okay? Let's take another thing with respect to the town's budget. Okay, and I know we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks. From 2019 to 2021, the waste removal budget went up $173,000. That's a 43% increase. There are things in here that, in a way, you can control them, but in other ways you can't. If there's isn't some way that we can come to work something out with respect to how we handle our trash, that's just going to go up. And, I appreciate what everybody's saying about the tax bill and all that. I mean, I pay taxes too, just like everybody else. But I mean, there's things that you can't control. I'll come back again to something that was addressed on your earlier thing tonight on the transfers. Worcester County retirement system, that's going to go up. Okay, you're going to pick up at least. I think you're going to pick up a retiree from the DPW and 2 from the police this year. Okay, so you're going to take a hit there. Okay, you're going to pick up the recently retired treasurer collector on your OPEB. All right, there's things you can't control, and it's a cost of doing business, whether you like it or not. And it's up to the people to decide whatever level of service that they want, because that's what governs the tax rate is what is determined by what people decide they want to spend at town meeting. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Clare. Other questions or comments? Maureen, I don't know if you have anything else. Steve, you have anything else? Otherwise,
I'm good, Brett.
Steve, anything else from your perspective?
No, just I think looking forward, it'd be nice to maybe get a look at that worksheet and try to see where were we in January and where are we now. So I don't know if that's something we can maybe coordinate with Kenny Costa, kind of get an idea of what our snapshot looks like, right now.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we can do. I think that's a separate exercise from approving the actual policy. So I certainly support the financial reserve policy based on everything we went through. I think it's a good practice. I think we are in a good position, and I think it helps perhaps or put some discipline into the process in terms of how we save money, how we allocate money, how we spend money, and how we manage and maintain a stable tax bill through time. Because I think that the only thing that we have when we have all the stabilization money is the flexibility to absorb unforeseen circumstances. The reason that's important is so that we don't significantly increase people's tax bills to cover an unexpected expense. So my view on the stabilization policy and the reserves policy is that it actually helps protect against increasing tax bills for unexpected expenses. So I'm in favor of this policy, but I agree, Steve. In addition or separately from approving this financial reserve policy, it's not going to hurt us to reconcile the analysis that Rick did with what Kenny has or what Derek's looking at, so that we have clear information as a board where we stand, each month or certainly for each town meeting with regard to reserves and the policy we have in place.
I would agree with you, Brett. And a separate aside for what Steve is asking for too. But that has nothing to do with the reserve policy itself.
No, I would agree.
The reason I'm asking for the worksheet is to clearly define what I like to call definitions, because I feel like I hear something in one meeting and the definition is totally different at the next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm certainly not prepared to approve this. At this point in time, I would be an A on this. But, again, it's your discretion, my two colleagues.
Okay.
I'm willing to go forward with it, Brett.
Okay. I am as well. Derek, I do want to, Steve, address your questions around some of the definition work. It seemed to me when I looked at the policy, it was explicit enough. Are there particular things in the policy, Steve, that you don't understand, or language that you don't understand when you read through the policy?
Well, I just think the ranges are too wide. That's part of the problem. 12 to 15% is a wide range. You got a 3% range in there.
Sorry, I'm just responding to you. You had said there's things you don't understand. So okay, so I understand you disagree with the ranges and you think they're too high. I totally get that. But I just wanted to make sure that there weren't things that you didn't understand.
Let me see. Well, what I'm saying is I have a very good understanding of how our budget works and how we pay for these things. What I'm unclear really is, again, some of the different numbers in here. For instance, we're talking about stabilization at 10% of the operating budget. So that's just the stabilization fund, not the capital stabilization fund?
That would be my assumption, but if it was capital, I would hope it would be labeled as capital stabilization. Derek, can you confirm that?
Yeah, this policy speaks directly to the general stabilization. I think there was a lot of conversation about the capital stabilization account. This policy doesn't speak directly, which is why I had made a suggestion that, after we go through our free cash certification and we don't consume all the 60% earmarked for capital, perhaps a prudent next step would be to take the balance of that capital money and put it into capital stabilization based upon a lot of the feedback we heard today.
Okay. Then, again, if you look at the free cash section, it says A, after policy A is free cash. The fourth paragraph says the town will endeavor to transfer a minimum of 10% of the certified free cash to the general stabilization fund. I'm not sure what the 15 means in there. But again, it's a minimum of 10. I thought we were talking about a maximum of 10. So again, I don't like that, because if you say a minimum of 10 and you're at 12, what does that mean? Next year you're going to 13? So again, this is what I'm talking about with definitions, but certainly if you folks are comfortable with it, that's up to you. But I don't understand the word 15 in there. And I don't understand why it would be minimum. If 10's your target, then that should be your maximum.
Yeah, Derek's pulling it up so we can all be looking at exactly the same thing. So is this what you're talking about here with this, what Derek has pulled up, Steve?
Yeah, if you access it through the agenda, the word 15 is in there, and it looks like, yeah, so I guess why is that minimum? That should be maximum.
My understanding is that was the floor, is that we were targeting the 10%. This is the amount that we would transfer of free cash into general stabilization. So that could be $20 if there's no money in free cash, or it could be whatever the 10% is. Okay. That's not a dollar amount. That's just a percent of what's in free cash.
Right, but it's saying a minimum.
Brett, but if you look at what we've been doing, if you go by that number that's there, and it's a good number, we'd be putting 330,000 in FY20 numbers into that stabilization fund. We've been putting 500,000, so we've really been exceeding. We truly should get our terminology correct.
What is the terminology here that folks don't? I understand that you disagree with the minimum of 10%, Steve, but is there some other language in here that's not clear?
Rick, which one were you speaking of when you said terminology?
Well, there's discussion on minimum and maximum on the 10%. If you look at the other benchmark communities, they have a maximum of 10%. It really is the decision of this group.
Rick, hold on. Are you talking about the amount of free cash that gets put into general stabilization, or are you talking about the target reserve number?
Well, let me be more specific. So we're in if you look at the 10% number, I believe that if you looked at it as part of free cash, it was about FY20 numbers, because I don't have the numbers in front of me for next year. Be about 220,000 you're putting into stabilization. We've been putting in at a rate of about 500,000 a year. So the question is that the number you want?
What number? The minimum of 10%?
No. You say on free cash that you're going to put 10% into, I believe it's stabilization. I can't really see it.
Yeah.
And if it's 10%, that's about $220,000.
Yeah.
But we're almost near the target. So
It would be a lesser percent, I think is what Rick is saying there.
yeah, I mean, you're pretty much at the target on the overall money you're putting into stabilization. So the question is, do you want to keep putting it in at 10%? We've been putting in at about 3%.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, right? So you're saying if we say a minimum of 10%, but we reach the target stabilization money, what do we do then? Because technically at that point, we don't need to keep putting money into stabilization.
Exactly.
Got it.
Brett?
So Derek or Kenny, how would you respond to that particular point? And then Maureen, you can answer or ask a question.
No, I was going to ask Kenny Costa, what was the percentage that we did put into stabilization, or we have in stabilization?
So I was just going to, on the last 2 years, we put in 500,000, the last 2 years into stabilization. That would, obviously that would be much more than the 2% or the amount. But then again, this is just guidance. And right now, currently, we're 8% of the fiscal year 21 budget. And again, this is just guidance. Obviously, this is to reach that 10% of the annual budget. Then at that point, then we could, transfer, something else, because at some point it could drop below, especially, if we go into a recession, we don't know. It's just providing the flexibility whether we want to fund it or not. But the first goal is to get to that 10%, goal first.
Right, but I want to, so that's great, thank you. I want to make sure that I very clearly address Steve's question and Rick's question. Your concern is that we're transferring a minimum of 10% of free cash to the stabilization fund. And your question is, what if we already hit that stabilization number? And if you read the second part of that sentence, it says, until the stabilization account reaches the 10% goal of the operating budget. So as soon as we reach that 10% goal of the operating budget, we would no longer endeavor to transfer a minimum of 10% of the certified free cash.
That's correct, Brett. I did not see that on the earlier document that I had. So we're good.
There's a revised document that's on the screen now that is not what you access when you're on the agenda. So some of the wording is a little bit different. So I'm working on what I'm seeing on the agenda. So if you go on, the Upton website and you open up the agenda, this is what you'll see. But even getting back to general stabilization there, again, minimum balance of 10% of the current operating budget. Minimum. The 10 should be the maximum. If that's where you're trying to get, 10's your maximum, not your minimum. Because now you have no ceiling.
Can we look at the specific wording that you're talking about? Because I'm not exactly sure what you're looking at.
Sure. Under B, stabilization fund, second paragraph.
All right. Can you guys pull that up on the screen?
Because according to what I'm reading, it shows no ceiling. So you just keep putting money in there and we just go broke. Or I would go broke.
Just give me 1 second here.
I mean, that's clearly not.
Just give me 1 second. I'm going to try to, because for some reason there's confusion here, and I don't think there should be confusion. The document that I pulled up, I just highlighted words. So I'm going to pull up I went to the link on the website, and I'm going to show that to everybody right now. Give me 1 second.
Thank you. Because I think we're just talking about different things, or we're mixing numbers here. Not saying we are going to agree when we clarify the numbers, but I want to at least be very clear about what we're disagreeing about.
Right. And there's, again, no cap on capital stabilization. So the town will establish and appropriate annually to the capital stabilization fund so that over time it achieves target balance.
Let's look at one thing at a time.
So this is, I'm just showing the paragraph here. I don't know if I can highlight it. That has been called into question. And I don't see a 15. I see it says the town will endeavor to transfer a minimum of 15.
See,
Okay, so
that's,
there's the 15.
that was
Okay,
one
so-
cause of concern.
Yep. Yep, so that should have been 10. As the other one was had parentheses around a 10. So that would have been 10. And then the other question was, until the stabilization account reaches the 10% goal of the operating budget. So I think there was that one error where the 15 right here should have been written as 10%.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the same document that I had.
Okay, so that's a correction that we can make. What was the other one, Steve?
If we go under section B, stabilization funds, and we read the second paragraph, general stabilization.
I think so.
So two problems with that particular, and again, I don't want to beat the document up. If you folks have it in your mind that you want to approve it, then, I don't want to be beating my.
I don't want to prove anything that you don't understand, Steve. So that, and I also frankly want to be very clear on my understanding of what your perspective is, because we can disagree, but again, I want to make sure that I understand what your concerns are, please.
Okay. So under general stabilization, the town will endeavor to maintain a minimum balance of 10%. I will endeavor a minimum balance of 10%. So if you're setting a minimum of 10, what's your maximum? That's a problem. I mean, that should be if your maximum, again, DLS requested 5% or recommended 5% a few years ago. Now they're at 10%. We're claiming a minimum of 10%. So now what does that mean? It's just going to grow, the way I'm reading it, it's going to grow uncontrolled. There's no reason to stop putting money in it.
The policy above talks, so I definitely want, Derek, your perspective on this, but my sense is that the way that this gets addressed, it says we're not obligated to continue to put money into this account. We're not obligated to contribute any money into this stabilization account from free cash once we hit that 10% of the operating budget. We can, we don't have to. I mean, obviously all of this is guidance, right? So none of this is absolute, we have to do it, but the guidance would be, as a best practice, until we reach this minimum balance of 10%, we put the 10% of the free cash into stabilization. Once we hit this 10%, then that free cash transfer becomes optional. And I agree with you. So, like, we wouldn't just keep putting money in here. I think you use words till we bankrupt the town. Or, I mean, like, obviously we're not going to do that, right? Like, we're stewards of the taxpayers' money. And the whole point of this is to be responsible with it, not to be irresponsible with it.
Mm-hmm. But again, that's, that's your perspective versus my perspective. I don't believe that should be a minimum there, but and again, I don't agree with the 10% either, so we're not going to agree on that particular paragraph. So let me just move quickly to the second paragraph, or third paragraph as you see it, which is capital stabilization. Again, no percentage in there. So now what are we going to look, and we're going to say, okay, well, we're where we want to be with general stabilization, but now we're going to see if we can build capital stabilization up to $2 million. You know what I mean? To me, I don't like it. It just looks like excess taxation to me. I'm not a big fan of pre-taxing people to begin with, and this will raise taxes. It's very important people are listening, and, you've got to understand that. When you start taxing and you start squirreling money away, you're overtaxing the people. So again, I don't agree with the percentages that are in here. You want to have a number next to that capital stabilization. It should be in the document. It shouldn't be subjective. But again, that's up to your debate.
Yeah.
Could I respond to that, Brett?
Yeah, just one. I just had one comment, Maureen, and then
okay.
The one comment I wanted to address, and again, clearly, Steve, this is where we disagree and have different perspectives, and that's fine. My take is you're calling it, taxing the people or increasing the tax on people, but to me, the fact of the matter is it's saving money, right? So as a homeowner, as a person, as a business, right, you need to save money to be able to address and handle any any unforeseen but necessary expenses. And so what we're debating is how much money you put into your savings account, right? So you can put in more or less money into your savings account, and clearly that's what we disagree about, is what the right amount is. But it's not that you're just overtaxing the people. What you're saying is we're trying to be responsible with taxpayer money, and the most responsible thing we can do is to have a sufficient savings account. Again, I know you disagree with that, but I understood and hear your position. I just wanted to share mine. Maureen, go ahead, please.
Well, I disagree with overtaxing the people. You can only raise 2.5%. And within that 2.5% is where you take the money to put aside for your savings or your budgets or whatever. The only way that you can overtax them to put savings away is if you do an override. I mean, we have not done any override. We stay within our 2.5 levy, and we're able to put monies in a savings account without overtaxing, only taxing them to the allowable levy.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I mean, this is one I think where probably, Steve, you and I agree more than not, which is taxing to like a 2.5% increase every year is a 2.5% increase, right? So I know we always talk about taxing to the levy limit, but the fact of the matter is, that our tax bills are a function of what people approve at town meeting, and absolutely 2.5% is the tax levy. We all know that. If we don't do an override, then it's 2.5%, and that doesn't mean that we're not increasing taxes. It just means we don't have to do an override. So,
I have another response to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I know
whether you do an override or not, you have to do your 2.5%. And whether you spend it or not, it still doesn't go away. It goes into excess levy capacity, which means you're going to raise the taxes anyways. Whether you spend it or whether you put it in a savings or what, you have to raise 2.5% every year.
Right, but let's not forget, and I know Kenny's probably going here, but let's not forget, in our budget presentation, 3.9% was the tax increase. It wasn't 2.5%, so just keep that in mind.
Can I put in another perspective?
Kenny's going to go next, Paul, and then.
All right.
I just wanted to add that this isn't a warrant article saying that we're raising this money to be transferred into the capital stabilization account. This is our general fund, this is our operating budget. So this is a financial indicator. This is how well we did. So remember, we could also have negative free cash. So if we had negative free cash, this whole policy would be moot. So there would be no free cash to transfer. But because, good budgeting by all of us, that's why at the end of the year, we do have, free cash. So remember, we budget conservatively on the revenues. So if revenues come over the total, that's part of the free cash. Also on the expenditure side. So as you know, we had a spending freeze this year. Derek and I, we worked with departments. They put in their requests to spend over $500, and we reviewed those requests. So we were, holding departments accountable on spending. And it's also what we didn't spend the prior year. So free cash is not really it's not a one-to-one against the tax rate. It's just really its performance. It's really how we did at the end of the year that we have monies left over. And this policy is helping, just providing guidance and providing policy. But again, if we have negative free cash, this policy is moot. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
I just got a couple of comments here. When this went by the Finance Committee, like I said, it's a couple of years ago, I think we all approved it, and then we got right to the very end, and we kind of added like a comment, provided that the situation allows, okay? To making a reference to what Mr. Accountant just referred to. If you have negative free cash, you can't do this. And if you have a small amount of free cash, you can't do this because you have to hold. The obvious example is snow removal. That's a moving target every year. We got lucky this year; we didn't spend the appropriation. But you need this money, and this is, like I say, a policy, a suggestion, a recommendation as to how it goes back. Let me add one more thing. We're talking about capital stabilization and general stabilization. Let's see. We're talking about a library senior center, and we've talked for a long time about modifications to the highway barn. I don't know, Dan Lazarus, how long have we been talking about that?
So about a year.
A while, right? And it's going to cost us a lot of money. So here's my perspective on this. If you take and keep adding money into stabilization, okay, these two projects most likely are going to require a debt exclusion. And that the bad word override, but it's actually a debt exclusion because it goes away. But if you have money, and let's say this library we're looking at $8 to $10 million, all right? And if you were in the position that this costs you, you're looking at a $10 million number, and I'm just using that. I'm not making any assumptions or anything like that. But if you had a sufficient amount of capital stabilization or a combination of general stabilization, and you could take and put $5,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 toward that $10 million nut, don't you think it'd be a lot more palatable down the line? Now, to use a reference that was made earlier here, we're taxing the people to make money. Well, if we don't tax the people, then you're going to come back to them and say, I need a $10 million override. They're not going to look very favorably upon that. But if you can say it's a $4 million or a $5 million override, that is much more palatable. And how do you do it? By building up your reserves, by building up your savings account. So that's all I'll add on that.
Thank you. So,
Could I ask Steve one question, Brett?
Yeah.
I'm a little confused because we can only raise 2.5%, but he's saying that we increase the taxes 3.9%. I don't know where that comes from. We're only allowed to do 2.5%.
That was in our budget proposal, Maureen, the opening pages of the budget proposal.
But that's a 3.9% increase within the allowable levy. Am I right with that, Kenny?
Correct. And there was also, if you recall, there was also stabilization money that we used, the $259,000. So that's also part of the 3.9.
Right.
And then there's also projected new growth as well is also part of that.
Thank you for explaining that, Kenny.
You're welcome.
In addition,
I think the question that you answered, that's the number I'm referring to. And as you're increasing spending by 3.9%, you're increasing taxation by 3.9%. Yes, we spent it on stabilization, but obviously it's going to get taxed.
So there's a few things. One second, Paul. So there's a few things I would like to just clarify and ask. One is because again, I think disagreeing on the percentages, that's we're going to disagree on the percentages, right? We get that. But I think that there's 2 points that I think we have that I potentially think we can address. But I'd love your perspective on this, Derek. One is the inclusion of the capital stabilization piece, both how we think of that holistically within our financial reserve policy. But so that's one topic, is how we reconcile sort of the capital stabilization with the general stabilization and having that as part of one policy, at least more clearly delineated. And then the second part of that is is there any conversation or is there any other best practice that talks about maximums in these accounts? So you'd say, hey, we're going to do a minimum of 10%, a maximum of X percent, or Y percent. I don't know. But is that something that's done? Because I think that could make certainly some people feel more comfortable that we're not just going to keep sucking money away, unfettered.
Yeah. So as I pointed out earlier, the floor in reserves per the bond rating agencies is 10%, and so again, that's our starting point. And that's, you see that feathered throughout this entire policy, this 10% in the stabilization account. Now, again, I'm going to go back to the 60% that we have recommended come from free cash that be earmarked specifically for capital needs each fiscal year. So I think one idea we could throw out there is maybe we move the 60% to 50%, take that additional 10% and earmark that specifically for the capital stabilization account each and every year. That'll demonstrate a commitment towards a savings towards major capital needs. And when I say major capital needs, I'm not talking about a $200,000 dump truck. I'm talking about, as Paul pointed out, infrastructure improvement, a building acquisition. So that's a way to address that issue. Additionally, if it makes folks feel better, we could also have a benchmark of, what's our goal? So what's our goal? So what's the purpose of this capital stabilization? And I just shared my opinion. What I think the purpose is, not for a dump truck or a rolling stock. It's for, major capital investments such as buildings. And then once you know that, then you can decide, okay, how much do we think is appropriate to put into that? What's our goal? Do we want to put in, $1.5 million, $2 million? So that's what I would suggest, and that's an easy way to do this. And again, we can revisit this in a year from now or 2 years from now and say, are we meeting our benchmarks? Are we committing enough dollars towards each and every one of these accounts, or do we have to make some adjustments?
Could I just have one more comment, Brett?
Yep. But I do, folks, want to try to wrap this up.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, but go ahead, please.
When it's all said and done, ultimately it's town meeting that votes what they want to put into any stabilization, general, capital, retirement, whatever. It comes down to what the voters want. Everything has to go to town meeting for a vote. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a minimum or a maximum, it's up to town meeting to vote it. Mm-hmm. That's all I got to say.
No, that's really critical to understand. And I also think that, I don't want to let perfect get in the way of good. And I think that this is a good policy as it's written. And I think to town manager's point, if we want to revisit it in a year, we can revisit it and say, hey, you know what? We've really got to get this capital stabilization piece figured out because nothing's going in there. The capital budget committee wants to do something more clear. They come up with a proposal. And I think that those are good takeaways and things that we can address. We can talk about putting a maximum in there. But I do think it's worth adopting this as it is just to move the ball down the field. Okay, I see two more fingers pointing. So go ahead, Derek, and then Paul, and let's try to keep it brief.
I only want to remind people that this just forces us to live within our means, right? It takes the guessing out of pet projects, and that because we have more money this year, we're going to spend more money. This is really, it forces us to live within our means and to be very direct on how we're going to spend. To me, this is a policy that forces us to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars.
Paul?
I just want to elaborate on what Mr. Accountant alluded to earlier. There's 4 or 5 factors that go into the budget. Yeah, this budget went up 3.7%. But what went into that? It went into your 2.5%. It went into your new growth. It went into your local receipts, and it went into your cherry sheet number. And whatever amount of money we took from other sources, i.e. stabilization and or free cash. The bottom line budget number, as has been mentioned here earlier, is separate and distinct from your ability to levy 2.5% additional taxation, okay? The other thing, yes, this budget went up 3.7%, but just think what it would have gone up if the school budget hadn't reduced by $966,000, okay? So, call it what you want. I fully support this plan that we're talking about for the past hour, I guess.
Thank you. Go ahead, Maureen. I will take a motion.
I would move that we accept the financial reserve policy as written.
Stephen Metellian, nay.
I'll second that motion. Maureen Bunnell, aye.
Brett Simus, aye. Majority action. So we're going to go now to, is there any recognition that folks have? Okay. Town manager report, Derek.
I'm going to keep my comments extremely brief, given the time. I just wanted to announce, well, first of all, as you can imagine, we're spending the vast majority of our time with year-end closings, wrapping up the budget, looking at how much money we're turning back to our taxpayers, which will ultimately be certified to free cash. I think the fire chief is still there. I think, they're going to turn back almost $50,000, the police department almost $60,000. And again, that just speaks to the level of scrutiny that the town accountant and each department has paid close attention to their budgets so that we can turn every dollar back that went unspent. So I want to congratulate all of them for their work this past year. I want to also mention that Mike Penko was before the board a couple of weeks back talking about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant. That grant will be submitted this week for $30,000. That grant, if we're to be awarded, will begin our planning process so that we can ultimately submit for a project grant, which could be upwards of anywhere from what we've seen in the range of $300,000 to the town of Millbury, got $1 million brought back to the town for infrastructure improvement. So we'll keep you posted on that. And then lastly, I saw Dennis, he must have jumped off, but Dennis Westgate and his team have recently submitted the state's Complete Streets Grant for $370,000, and we will keep you all posted if we're to be awarded that. If you can recall, last year we submitted and we were unsuccessful, so hopefully we've taken back some lessons learned on that, and we're going to try to be successful this year. If any questions, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for Derek?
None from me, thank you.
No, I have none at this time.
Okay. And any public comment?
No.
Mr. Simus.
Yes, sir.
I don't know whether you saw my note. I don't know whether you really should probably take care of that if you don't mind, just from a formality point of view, sir.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I did see that, Dave. So we just need to clean up the motion for adopting the financial reserve policy. So I think we weren't clear on how we needed to do that motion and second because Steve didn't support it. So Maureen made the motion and then Steve voted nay. So what we need is a second to the motion. So I would second the motion, right? So the way that should have gone is Maureen would make the motion. Steve didn't want to second it, so I would second the motion, which typically is I I would second the motion, and then we would take a vote, and can we record that as such, Sandy, as long as Jen and Steve are okay with that? So that would be Maureen making the motion, me seconding the motion, us taking a vote, Maureen, I, Brett, I, and Steve, nay.
So that's fine with me.
Have that, thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
No problem.
Any other public comment? Okay. So at this point, we are going to break into executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21, exception number 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for contract negotiations with non-union personnel, in this case, the town manager. So we will not be returning to open session. So this concludes the public portion of the meeting for today. Thank everybody for their time and attention. We can stop the recording, and then Steve and Maureen